She cheated with my best friend, stole $250, $0 from our joint account during our divorce, and now insists I sign over the house to keep her from going to jail. Can I really lose everything over her lies? Hello, everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get blindsided like this. Honestly, I thought I knew everything about my wife, Emily. We'd been together for almost 10 years, married for 5. We had a nice house, good jobs, a couple of kids. Things looked perfect on the surface. But then, out of nowhere, everything started unraveling. It's like I woke up one day and realized I was living with a stranger who was hiding a whole world of lies. It all started subtly. Small things, you know. She'd be on her phone more than usual, hiding her screen when I came into the room. She'd come home late from work dinners that I later found out were just excuses. She'd get defensive when I asked about her whereabouts, brushing me off with that bitchy attitude she's perfected over the years. But I didn't want to believe it. I told myself maybe I was overthinking, maybe I was just paranoid. Then came the day I found her phone. I'd been looking for something in her purse, just to clear my head, I guess, and I saw a text message. It wasn't anything explicit at first, just a few flirty words, but the tone was enough to set off alarms. I scrolled a little more and saw messages between her and Mark, her best friend. That's when I saw it. A string of messages that made my stomach drop. Pictures of her in bed with him, laughing, touching each other like they were the only two people in the world. I couldn't believe it. My wife Emily, the woman I trusted, was cheating on me with my best friend Mark. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. How long had this been going on? Was it recent? How did I miss all the signs? I kept thinking about all the times she'd told me she was exhausted after work, or how she didn't want to have sex anymore. Turns out, she'd been sneaking around with Mark for months. I didn't confront her right away. I needed to think, to gather my thoughts, but the truth was I was furious. Betrayal doesn't even begin to cover it. I felt humiliated, hurt, and a deep-seated anger that I had never experienced before. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything she'd lied about, her secret calls, her late nights, the way she'd been cold and distant for months. I knew I had to face her, but I also knew this was just the beginning of something much darker. That night I waited until she was asleep. Then I took her phone and dug through her messages. I found more than I bargained for: plans to meet up, promises to keep their affair hidden, and even a few photos Mark had taken of her when they were together. It was a massacre of trust, and I felt like I was drowning in it. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything in my head: how she'd lied to me, how she'd betrayed everything we built together. The next morning I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to confront her. I called her into the living room and I showed her the messages. Her face twisted into a sneer, and she started with her usual line: "You're overreacting, it's just sex, it doesn't mean anything." I couldn't believe I was hearing her deny everything, even as her eyes darted around nervously. I told her I knew she'd been cheating. I told her I'd seen the messages, and I demanded an explanation. She shrugged, trying to act like she was the victim. "You've been busy with work, I was lonely. Mark's just a friend, it's not a big deal." Her voice was cold, dismissive. She said I was paranoid, that I was reading too much into it, but I knew better. I knew she'd been lying to my face for months. The betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way she lied so effortlessly, like she didn't care about how much she was hurting me. I felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak. How could she do this? How could she cheat with my best friend? I'd trusted her with everything. That day I realized my marriage was over, at least as I knew it. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone who was capable of deception and betrayal. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. I had to figure out how to handle this, how to protect myself from her lies and her manipulations. That's when I started noticing the money. Or rather, the missing money. Turns out, while I was blindsided by her affair, she'd been pulling a different kind of stunt behind my back. But I'll tell you about that in the next part. After that confrontation, everything changed. I couldn't focus at work, I couldn't sleep, and my mind kept circling back to the betrayal. But what hit me even harder was discovering the financial mess she'd left behind. Turns out, Emily had been sneaking around not just with Mark, but also stealing from us, our joint account. I found out she drained about $250, $0 over the last few months. Just vanished. I couldn't believe it at first. I mean, I always thought we were solid. Financially, we had a good savings, a decent retirement fund, and a house that I thought we both loved. But then I saw the bank statements, the transfers, the withdrawals. She'd been funneling money into some secret account she'd set up. It was all so calculated, so cold. I felt like I'd been hit with a ton of bricks. I immediately called the bank, trying to freeze the accounts, but she'd been smart. She transferred most of the money into offshore accounts or paid it out in cash. She'd cover her tracks well. Still, I was furious. How could she do this? How could she betray me not just emotionally but financially? She stolen $250,000 from us, money we'd worked hard for, money that was supposed to secure our future. And she was acting like she was the victim, crying about how she felt lonely and neglected. I started digging into her phone and computer, trying to find out where the money went, who she might have been paying off. I found a lot of shady emails and texts. She'd been talking to some guy named Steve, apparently a lawyer or accountant of some sort. There were messages about transferring funds, about covering her tracks, and even plans to buy a new house somewhere abroad. The more I looked, the more I realized she'd been planning this for a while. Meanwhile, her attitude was infuriating. She kept insisting she was innocent, that I was overreacting, that I was paranoid, that she only cheated because she was lonely, and that the money was just a way to escape. She called me controlling, accused me of not trusting her. She even had the nerve to say she was going to fight for the house, for custody of the kids, and to keep everything she could. I couldn't believe her. She was stealing from us, lying about her affair with Mark, and now she was trying to manipulate the situation so she'd come out on top. I knew I needed a plan, something to make her pay for what she'd done, both emotionally and financially. I started talking to a lawyer, trying to understand my rights, what I could do to protect what was left of our assets. I also hired a private investigator to follow her around, see who she was meeting, and figure out her next move. What really set me off was the fact that she was demanding I sign over the house to her, claiming she'd keep her nose clean if I just gave her the property. She said she'd go to jail if I didn't, and that she'd lose everything. Her freedom, her reputation, everything. She played the victim so well, crying about how she'd never do anything to hurt the kids, even though she was busy screwing my best friend and stealing from us. I knew she was lying. I knew she'd been planning to run away with that money and possibly with Mark or Steve to start fresh somewhere else. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. Not after all the pain she caused me, not after the betrayal of our marriage, and not after the theft of our entire savings. I started gathering evidence, screenshots, bank records, her texts, and I documented everything. I knew I had to be careful. She was manipulative, and I didn't trust her not to spin some story to turn the situation around. I also started thinking about revenge. Not just emotional revenge, but something that would hit her where it hurt, her reputation, her freedom, her money. I didn't want her to walk away scot-free. One night I decided to confront her again, this time with everything I'd uncovered. She was in the kitchen, sipping wine, acting like she was innocent. I laid out all the evidence I had, told her I knew about the money, the affair, the lies. Her face twisted into a sneer, and she started with her usual blame shifting. "You're just jealous, you're insecure," she spat. "You don't understand what I was going through." I told her I wasn't interested in her excuses, that I was done being played for a fool, that she was going to lose everything if she kept lying and stealing. I saw her eyes flicker with panic, but she tried to play it cool. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is all just a misunderstanding. You're paranoid." But I knew better. I knew she was desperate to save herself, but it was too late. The damage was done. I didn't plan to let her walk away without consequences. I was just figuring out how to do it. I had to make her pay for everything, her lies, her cheating, her theft. I was angry, yes, but also determined. She was going to regret crossing me. The next step was figuring out how to take back what she stole and how to make her face the consequences of her actions. That's when I started looking into legal options for seizing her assets, exposing her to the authorities if necessary. I also thought about turning her in for the theft, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. I just knew I couldn't let her get away with it all. Not anymore. That's where I am now, trying to piece everything together and decide the best way to make her pay. After I gathered all the evidence, bank statements, her shady emails, the texts with Steve, and the photos of her with Mark, I felt a strange mix of relief and rage. I knew I had enough to prove her guilt, but I also knew I had to be smart about how I handled this. Confronting her again, I laid everything out on the table. Her face twisted into a sneer, and she threw out her usual lies. "You're just paranoid. You don't understand. It's all a misunderstanding." But I wasn't buying it anymore. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I knew about her affair, the money she stole, and her plans to run away. I told her I was done playing her game, that I'd be calling the lawyer, that I'd be taking her to court, and that she was going to face serious consequences. Her reaction was classic: denial, then anger, then tears. She started crying, claiming she was sorry, claiming she'd been stressed, and that she never meant to hurt me. The thing is, I've heard her cry before, but this time it felt different. This time, I saw right through her crocodile tears. She was trying to manipulate me, trying to make me feel guilty for catching her, but I wasn't falling for it. I knew she'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. She'd been sneaking around, stealing, lying. Everything I thought I knew about her was a lie. I felt like I'd been living in a nightmare, and I was just starting to wake up. I realized I had to start taking serious steps to protect what was left of our life. I couldn't let her continue to drain our accounts or manipulate the situation. I contacted a divorce lawyer, explained everything, and started preparing for what was going to be a messy battle. I also hired a private investigator to keep tabs on her movements. I needed to be one step ahead. I wanted to make sure she didn't run off with the rest of the money or try to hide anything. Meanwhile, she kept insisting she was innocent, that she'd never do anything to hurt me or the kids, and that I was overreacting. That's when I decided I had to play hardball. I told her I was going to expose everything: her affair, her theft, her manipulations, and that I'd fight for full custody of the kids if she kept lying and stealing. I knew she'd try to spin this, as always, but I was ready. I wanted her to see that I wasn't going to be played anymore. The more I dug into her financials, the more I realized she'd been planning her escape for months. She'd hidden money, transferred assets, and even made arrangements to move abroad. I found emails where she talked about buying a house in Mexico, setting up offshore accounts, and disappearing with the kids if she had to. That was the moment I understood she wasn't just cheating. She was trying to wipe her slate clean and start over somewhere else, possibly with Mark or whoever else she'd been seeing. I knew I had to act fast. I started consulting with attorneys on how to freeze her assets, how to get a court order to seize any remaining funds she might try to hide, and how to prevent her from leaving the country with the kids. I also started gathering witnesses, friends and neighbors who might testify to her manipulative behavior or her attempts to hide money. I wanted to make sure she couldn't lie her way out of this, that I had enough proof to hold her accountable. Her attitude was still defiant, but I could see the cracks forming. She was trying to maintain her composure, but I knew she was panicking inside. I was too, honestly. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I'd been betrayed on every level: emotionally, financially, legally, and I was determined not to let her get away with it. I wanted to make her see that her actions had consequences, that she couldn't just cheat, steal, and manipulate her way out of this. I planned to fight for everything: our house, the kids, the money she'd stolen, and I was ready to go to war if I had to. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for my kids, who deserved stability and honesty. I knew that once I exposed her lies, her manipulations, and her betrayal, she'd have no choice but to face the music. I was ready for that. I just hoped I could get through it without losing myself completely. By the time I had all my ducks in a row, lawyers hired, evidence compiled, private investigator following her moves, I knew I had to confront her again. This time, not just with accusations, but with a plan. I sat her down in the living room, calm but firm, and laid everything out on the table. I told her I knew about the affair, the stolen money, and her plans to run. Her face went pale for a moment, then she sneered and started throwing her usual blame-shifting lines. "You're controlling. You don't trust me. It's all your fault." But I wasn't in the mood for her lies anymore. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I was done playing her game, that I was calling the lawyer, that I was going to take her to court, and that she was going to face serious consequences. I showed her the evidence on my phone, screenshots of her texts with Mark, the bank statements showing the withdrawals, her emails discussing offshore accounts and plans to leave the country. I told her I knew she'd been planning to escape with the money, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Her reaction was classic. Tears welled up and she started crying fake tears, claiming she was sorry, that she'd been under so much stress, that she'd never meant to hurt me. She said I was paranoid, that I was making everything into a big deal. But I'd heard enough. I knew her game. She was trying to manipulate me again, just like she always did. I told her I didn't want her apologies. I wanted her to understand that she was about to lose everything, that her lies had consequences. I then handed her a legal notice, informing her that I was filing for divorce, that I was freezing her assets, and that I was going to seek full custody of the kids. I told her I'd be working closely with my attorney to make sure she couldn't hide any more money or run away. She looked stunned for a moment, then her face twisted into a sneer. "You're threatening me now, over money, over a stupid affair." She spat. I didn't bother to respond. I just told her that she'd burned her bridges, that she'd lost her right to play the victim anymore. I said I'd do everything in my power to protect what's mine, our house, our savings, our kids, and that she'd have to answer for her actions. I saw her eyes flicker with panic, but she quickly masked it with arrogance. She was trying to act like she was still in control, but I knew better. What really set me off was discovering her plans to leave with the kids. I found emails from her to Steve, discussing arrangements to take the children abroad, to start fresh somewhere else. She'd even talked about how we could start over in Mexico or somewhere similar, away from everyone. That's when I realized she wasn't just cheating and stealing. She was trying to disappear entirely. I couldn't let that happen, so I made arrangements with my lawyer to get a court order preventing her from leaving the country with the kids. I also started the process of filing for full custody, knowing I'd have to fight her hard. I didn't want her to take the kids away while she was busy lying, stealing, and manipulating her way out of this mess. I was prepared to show the court everything: her lies, her affair, her theft, and to fight for their well-being. Meanwhile, she kept insisting she was innocent, that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. She kept crying, throwing herself on the floor, trying to guilt-trip me, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I'd been fooled enough times. I knew her game. I knew she'd been planning her escape for months. My focus now was on protecting my kids and making sure she paid for her betrayal. I also started talking to some close friends and family, explaining what was happening. I needed witnesses. I needed support. I felt like I was fighting a war on all fronts, emotionally, financially, legally. But I was determined. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let her walk away with everything she'd stolen, including my trust. I had to stand up for myself, for my kids, and for what was right. The next step was clearing out her accounts, making sure she couldn't access any more money, and preparing for the court battle. I knew she'd try to manipulate the process, spin stories, or even threaten me with jail if I pushed too hard. But I was prepared. I had enough evidence to prove her guilt, and I was ready to fight for what was ours. All I wanted was to get her out of my life for good, to stop her from destroying everything I'd worked so hard for. The court date was set about 3 weeks after I filed everything. In the meantime, I kept gathering evidence, coordinating with my lawyer, and watching her moves through the private investigator. She was trying to act normal, but I caught her several times meeting with Steve in secret, trying to transfer more money or making calls I couldn't hear. It was clear she was panicked, scrambling to cover her tracks. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction knowing I was one step ahead, but mostly I was just exhausted from the constant stress. When the day finally came, I was nervous but prepared. I sat across from her in the courtroom, and I could see she was trying to put on her usual tough act. She was still insisting she was innocent, crying fake tears, claiming she'd been forced into this by my controlling ways. Her lawyer was doing her best to spin her lies, claiming I was trying to ruin her reputation. But I had all the proof, screenshots, bank records, witness statements. I knew I was going to win this fight. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer presented the evidence. I saw her lawyer try to argue that she was entitled to half the house and the assets, but I had the documentation showing her theft, her affair, and her plans to leave with the kids. I also presented the evidence of her offshore accounts and her attempt to hide money from us. It was clear she'd been planning to run away with the rest of the cash, and the judge took that seriously. When it was her turn to speak, she tried to deny everything, claiming I was crazy, that I was trying to ruin her life, and that she never cheated or stole. But I had everything on my side. The judge looked at her with a mixture of skepticism and disapproval, and I could see she was starting to crack. She kept insisting she loved the kids and that she was a good mother, but I knew her lies wouldn't hold up. In the end, the court granted me full custody of the children, froze her assets, and issued an order preventing her from leaving the country. She was furious, yelling and crying as she realized her game was over. Her lawyer tried to appeal, but the evidence was too strong. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief that I was finally taking back control, and anger that she'd put us through all of this. The aftermath was a whirlwind. I started the process of dividing the assets, reclaiming what she'd stolen, and making arrangements for the kids' future. I also worked with the police to investigate her theft of the money, and I filed for divorce. It was a long, painful process, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't stay married to a woman who had lied, cheated, and stolen from us. What hurt the most was knowing that the woman I loved, the woman I'd built a life with, was capable of such betrayal. But I also realized I couldn't let her win. I had to move forward, rebuild my life, and protect my kids from her manipulations. I learned a lot through this ordeal about trust, deception, and the importance of standing up for yourself. Now, as I sit here reflecting, I see how far I've come. The house is still ours, the kids are safe, and I'm finally starting to breathe again. The pain of betrayal doesn't go away completely, but it gets easier with time. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone in a similar situation, don't ignore the signs. Trust your gut, gather evidence, and don't be afraid to fight for what's right. Because in the end, you have to protect yourself and your future, no matter how hard it gets. Would you like me to continue with the final part? Looking back now, I realize how much this whole ordeal changed me. I used to think I was invincible, that I could trust the people closest to me. Turns out trust is fragile, and sometimes it's shattered in ways you never see coming. The betrayal hurt like hell, more than I ever thought possible, but it also forced me to confront a side of myself I didn't know existed, the side that fights back, that refuses to be broken. One of the hardest lessons I learned is that standing up for yourself isn't just about fighting legal battles or exposing lies. It's about reclaiming your sense of control, your dignity, and your future. I had to cut out the toxicity, the lies, and the manipulations, and start building a new life from the ground up. That meant cutting ties with Emily completely, even if it meant losing the woman I once thought I knew. The kids are doing okay. They're still young, but they've picked up on the tension, and I've made sure they feel safe and loved. I keep reminding myself that I did what I had to do, what any parent should do, to protect them from the chaos. It's not easy, and some days are harder than others, but I know I made the right choice. They deserve stability, honesty, and a father who's willing to fight for them. As for Emily, I hear she's trying to start over somewhere abroad, maybe with some of the stolen money. Honestly, I don't care anymore. She lost her access to our assets, and she's facing charges for theft and fraud. I hope she learns her lesson, that betrayal only leads to destruction. It's not about revenge anymore. It's about justice and making sure she pays the price for what she's done. What I want others to take away from this is simple. Don't ignore the red flags. If something feels off, If your partner is secretive, evasive, or acting differently, trust your instincts. Gather evidence, protect your assets, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. The truth will come out sooner or later, and it's better to face it head-on than to let someone ruin your life from the inside out. Finally, I've learned that forgiveness isn't always possible, and that's okay. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away and rebuild. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer. I'm rebuilding my confidence, my trust in myself, and my hope for the future. I know I'll be okay, even if the scars from this experience stay with me. If there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's this. Never let betrayal define you. Stand tall, protect what's yours, and never underestimate the strength you have inside. Because in the end, the only person who truly has your back is yourself. And I promise, you're stronger than you think.